Like many other kids growing up, few things sparked as much joy in me as Saturday morning TV. I mean, sure, there were other kids shows on during the rest of the week, but there was just something that hit different about the ones that got the vaulted Saturday morning time slot. There were only 2 glorious days in the weekend, and time was precious, damn it, so they better make sure that the stuff we were watching was damn good. Also, my parents let me swear a little bit on the weekends. It was friggin' rad. To satiate our desire for quality programming, networks sourced their ideas for Saturday morning shows from all sorts of different avenues. Whether it be from movies, TV shows, or legendarily difficult comedians, the Saturday morning blocks were always chock full of an eclectic array of programming. Even still, there were a fair amount of Saturday morning shows that stood out because of how peculiar they were. Shows that were wholly unique amongst their contemporaries because of how strange they were. Shows that were, for the lack of a better term, weird. And when it comes to weird Saturday morning shows, there is one that was certainly the weirdest of them all. This is Pop Culture Hyperfixations, and this is the story of a guy named Al. And he lived in the sewer with his hamster pal, but the sanitation workers didn't really approve, and you get the gist. It's the Weird Al Show episode.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
Today's video is sponsored by KristenSt.Cat.com. Full transparency, I may be a little biased because this is my girlfriend's small business, but as far as I'm concerned, it's the premier destination for dumb stuff made by a shoddy internet artist. And don't get mad at me, that's her quote, not mine. She's got stickers, pens, keychains, and more, and enter the promo code PCH at checkout for 15% off your next purchase. Remember, shop small and shop stupid at KristenSt.Cat.com. Now, back to the video. The story of the Weird Al Show begins with, well, Weird Al. Since the moment he first garnered national attention in the early 80s, Weird Al Yankovic and his song parodies have been a fixture of American pop culture. So much so that it feels strange to even try to provide context for his career, as I kind of find it hard to believe that anyone at this point doesn't know his deal. I think most kids go through a Weird Al phase, but I'm one of those kids who grew up, but didn't grow out of it. As an adult, I've seen him live 4 times, which for those keeping score at home, is twice more than Danzig, 3 more times than The Cure, and 4 more times than Starland Vocal Band, which is really weird because I do have a tattoo of them. Al's been a prominent musician for over 40 years at this point, and I think you could argue that he's never been more popular than he is right now. But on a personal level, I don't think I was ever more into him than I was in the late 90s. My favorite song as an 8-year-old growing up in a small, woodsy town in Massachusetts was obviously Gangsta's Paradise. So the minute I heard Weird Al do Amish Paradise, it was game over. I listened to the Bad Hair Day album all the time. And I remember having my tiny mind blown when I listened to his parody of TLC's Waterfalls, Don't Go Making Phony Calls, and an entire section of the song was just one of Bart Simpson's prank calls to Moe's Tavern. To this day, it's still one of my favorite albums. So much so that when I saw Weird Al play last year, I audibly gasped when he played his original song, Everything You Know Is Wrong, which is single-handedly the dorkiest thing I've ever done up until I started making this video. But I didn't just bring up that era of Weird Al just to drop some of my lore on you. I brought it up because that was precisely the era where the Weird Al Show first came to fruition. And although it didn't premiere until 1997, the conception of the idea can be traced all the way back to 1984. Coming off the success of his debut album and especially his song Eat It, Al and his manager Jay Levy began pitching networks the idea of a Weird Al kids show. The pair of them thought there was an obvious market for it, and while networks were willing to let him do interstitials during their children's programming over the years, nobody was ever willing to give him his own show. Al continued pitching his idea throughout the 80s and 90s, and while he never got the show off the ground, he did spend that time expanding his talents as a writer, director, and actor. Most notably with his 1989 film UHF, which because I mentioned it, my Weird Al fandom means I am now legally obligated to share a scene from it.
I never should have taken this job.
What a classic scene. After years of honing his craft outside of the music world, Al finally began making headway on his kids show in the 90s. To help get it over the finish line, he partnered with the legendary television personality Dick Clark, who, aside from his on-screen role as a host, was a force behind the scenes as well. His company, Dick Clark Productions, made countless things for television, including a 1998 UPN made-for-TV movie that still gives me anxiety to even think about, Alien Abduction Incident in Lake County. I'm not kidding. I'm writing this video 2 weeks before I start editing this part, and I am already stressed out at having to find a clip for it. Someone who wasn't stressed, called Dean Kamen, that's going in the Segway Hall of Fame, was Weird Al, who found it incredibly empowering to walk into pitch meetings with a Hollywood heavyweight like Dick Clark by his side. The partnership quickly garnered results, as after years of trying to get the show made, he finally got some interest from CBS. At one point, CBS had been a dominant force in Saturday morning programming, with shows like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Muppet Babies, and especially Pee-wee's Playhouse, which we'll come back to that later, but by 1997, all those shows had come to an end. And aside from Beakman's World, which was better than Bill Nye the Science Guy, and don't let anyone gaslight you into thinking otherwise, they were completely renovating their lineup, and a Weird Al show seemed like a perfect fit. But as the deal neared completion, CBS dropped a bombshell late in the process. Due to a decree by the US government, going forward, the network was only interested in educational programming.
Explain how.
Okay, so back in the 80s when Saturday morning programming was arguably at its peak, parents groups became rightfully concerned that most of the shows being aired were thinly veiled attempts to sell products to children. The US government agreed and in 1990 passed the Children's Television Act, which not only limited how commercials would air during children's TV, but also mandated networks broadcast at least 3 hours of educational content for children a week or face the wrath of the FCC. While the law arguably came from a good place, it was clumsily executed, as networks very quickly found loopholes around it. Instead of putting resources towards new educational programming, they would just air the shows they claimed were teaching valuable lessons at hours barely any kids were watching. And even the shows they were trying to pass off as educational included the likes of Yogi Bear, The Jetsons, and America's Funniest Home Videos. Although, to be fair, that show did teach me that it's always fun to do silly voices over someone else's misfortunes.
Oh, I'm gonna get you. You guys, I'm gonna get you. Oh, God, okay. Oh, no, this time. Oh, God, okay. You know what? That's it. I'm gonna get you. Oh, my God, don't move. They moved.
In 1996, the government closed a lot of the loopholes and put in stricter guidelines regarding children's programming. Not only was the 3 hours of educational content rule still in effect, but now networks were held more accountable to demonstrate that what they were airing met the government's standard of educational and informative programming. In case you 90s kids were wondering, that's what the EI branding meant on all those shows back then, as opposed to what I thought it meant, which is this show is probably going to suck. The new regulations were set to hit in the fall of 1997, right around the time Al was in talks for his new show, and CBS weren't going to risk pissing off the FCC. So when they asked Al if his show could be educational, he said that he could do it, and the Weird Al show was finally a go. Although Al was excited in the moment, he would later refer to it as his deal with the devil.
Stupid! You're so stupid!
And so, after years of dreaming, the Weird Al show was finally a reality. The premise for the show was pretty simple, as it would be about Al hosting his own kids show from his underground cave with his sidekick, Harvey the Wonder Hamster. Harvey actually dated back to Al's recurring MTV specials, Al TV. Those specials, aside from being such a joy to stumble onto whenever they aired, also informed some of the ways he would approach television. In his vision for the Weird Al show, he saw it as a mix of sketches, cartoons, music videos, and life lessons, complete with a rotating group of memorable characters and special guest stars. If you're thinking this sounds a lot like Pee-wee's Playhouse, you aren't alone, as it was a comparison a lot of people made. I mean, not only was Al the first live-action Saturday morning host since Pee-wee went off the air, he was even on the same network. Al did acknowledge the similarities, and while praising Paul Rubin's talents, did let people know that he thought his comedic sensibilities would make it different enough from Pee-wee's Playhouse. That said, he did hire Wayne White as the set designer, who would also design the Playhouse, which you gotta admit is pretty funny. Wayne White was one of the many talented people who helped shape the show, including a writing staff whose members would go on to have credits working on everything from News Radio, to Metalocalypse, to Kim Possible, to The Man Show. As part of a recurring cartoon short segment titled Fat Man, Al not only got future Jimmy Neutron creator Keith Alcorn and his company DNA Studios to do the animation, but also hired legendary voice actor Billy West to play Harvey the Wonder Hamster. Another cartoon was briefly considered for that slot as a young animator named Seth MacFarlane pitched Al on an idea he was working on about some characters in Rhode Island, but Al declined because while the show was funny, CBS was never gonna go for it. Rounding out the behind-the-scenes crew was a different young talent who would also go on to have a major career, as the director hired for the show was Peyton Reed. Well, in 1997, his biggest claims to fame was probably from directing made-for-TV remakes of classic Disney movies. He would eventually go on to have a prolific Hollywood career, as he directed movies like Yes Man, Ant-Man, and Bring It On, Man. The cast who worked on The Weird Al Show were just as talented as those who worked behind the scenes. Recurring characters included Paula J. Parker as Val Brentwood Gal Spy, Danielle Weeks as Al's cousin Corky, Bronson Pinchot as rival talk show host Uncle Ralphie, Gary Leroy Gray as Bobby the Inquisitive Boy, Judy Tenuta as the dubious psychic Madame Judy. Okay, so I guess it wasn't Bronson Pinchot, it was someone named Jack Plotnick as Uncle Ralphie, and Brian Haley as Al's superhero neighbor, the Hooded Avenger. Al was a huge fan of Haley and begged him to do the show. Haley agreed, and although he did like working with Al, in the interviews I've read, most of his memories revolve around how much he hated his costume, as it not only made him sweat profusely, but also made him look fat. While Al may have been a fan of Haley's, rounding out the cast was a man Al revered, Stan Freberg, who played the fictional head of the network, J.B. Toppersmith. Freberg was one of Al's biggest influences, and a hell of a funny musician in his own right. So much so that there was discussion of adding Freberg to the writing staff, but Al decided there was no way he could ever be Freberg's boss. Stan Freberg wasn't the only one of Al's influences to get offered the job, as he also reached out to two of his other heroes, Tom Lehrer and Shel Silverstein. Lehrer had retired from the public eye by that point, so Al offered him the unseen voice-only role of the guy boarded up in the wall, but Lehrer politely declined and Eddie Deason took the part instead. Silverstein also declined a role in the show as well, but offered to join as a creative consultant, which Al later admitted he wished he had taken him up on. The only other recurring character of note was Patricia Place as Al's accordion teacher, Mrs. Fessenmeyer. And it's not so much that her character was really important, as much as her casting. Patricia Place was not the original choice for the role. The original pick was Frances Bay, better known as Grandma from Happy Gilmore, but the network allegedly said no due to the fact she looked too Italian.
And in this house,
Grandma from Happy Gilmore
is a hero. End of story.
And now is as good a time as any to talk about what Al meant when he said he made a deal with the devil. The production of The Weird Al Show was an absolute nightmare. Like I had said earlier, CBS was incredibly focused on making sure their educational programming met the government standards, and they took that desire to an extreme that severely limited the show. Al thought that the best way to deliver lessons to the kids would be to hide their medicine a bit and teach them through comedy, as he had faith that kids would be able to figure it out on their own. But the S in CBS certainly didn't stand for subtlety, as the network wanted the lessons to be shoved down the children's throats. They were on the writers to make sure the lesson was constantly being reinforced, to the point the writers just had Billy West literally yell the lessons during the beginning of the episode, as well as before every single commercial break. They didn't want the kids to figure it out for themselves, they wanted to hammer it into their brains. Speaking of hammering children's brains, another big bugaboo of the network was something called imitable behavior. They were always on Al that he couldn't say or do certain things that children at home might imitate, which I guess is all well and good in theory, but if you watch the show for more than 10 minutes, you'd see plenty of things that somehow didn't get flagged. The one most cited in videos and podcasts about the show is that Al somehow putting his pet hamster through life-threatening dangerous stunts every week never seemed to be an issue, but other more mundane things got the imitable behavior label. Speaking of Harvey, one of the funniest notes they received from the network was that Harvey the Wonder Hamster needed more personality. That's just one of the network's many bizarre notes, and instead of talking about all them, it'd probably be easier if I just show you a list. Further complicating matters was the show's breakneck pace. Al and a lot of the production team were running on little sleep at that point, as they were filming 2 episodes a day. Not only that, but the network's meddling about the educational content proved to be the worst during that time period. CBS would suddenly redefine the lesson they were supposed to be teaching, and so the team would have to completely reconfigure the show at the last minute, all at the expense of the comedy. Brian Haley would say that the scripts they got were incredibly funny, but all these changes from the network and the pace of filming meant they had no time to really do any justice to the material. To make matters even more frustrating, and yes, it somehow gets more frustrating, was that while the network was incredibly meddling on one hand, they were incredibly unsupportive on another. One of their directives for the show was music videos, which makes sense because it's Weird Al and that's his whole shtick, but they didn't want to pay any music rights, which is why there are hardly any new videos on the show. When it came to booking special guests, the network wasn't much help there either. When he first envisioned the show, Al thought he would have the pick of the litter when it came to guest stars, and even mentioned having written down ideas for the likes of U2 and Mel Gibson. But instead he found himself getting a lot of no's. Among those who turned down cameos for one reason or another were Robert Stack, Leslie Nielsen, Christopher Walken, Cindy Crawford, They Might Be Giants, Fran Drescher, and Tyra Banks, whose agent allegedly told Al she doesn't like kids, she doesn't like Saturday mornings, and she doesn't like you.
I was rooting for you! We were all rooting for you! How dare you!
Jeff Goldblum also turned down a cameo, though would see Al say he was going to show a clip from Jeff's film Jurassic Park, except the gag would be that it was Al's Jurassic Park music video instead. With Goldblum declining the role, they instead went with the next logical replacement, Smart Guy's Taj Mowry. Yeah, say what you will about the cameos they didn't get, but the show was not lacking in the guest star department. Part of the reason was that they filmed on the old Tonight Show with Johnny Carson set, which was right next door to Jay Leno's Tonight Show set, so when he needed a guest star, Al would just wander over there to see if he could convince someone to make a cameo, which most notably Drew Carey agreed to. Still, even without that Tonight Show connection, Al called in a lot of favors and got a lot of people to do the show. Or in the case of Clarence Clemens, guilted him over the time the big man mispronounced Al's name at an award show. The show featured everyone from Ron Popeil and Tony Little, to Michael McKean and David Landers, to Macho Man and Randy Savage, who infamously wrestled and lost to Harvey the Wonder Hamster. Of course, he only agreed to take the dive as long as Al promised him it was not a girl hamster. Numerous cast members from UHF also appeared on the show, with Geddy Watanabe even reprising his role as Cooney. Another big part of the show was the music, as there were live performances on the show from not only Al himself, but Barenaked Ladies, All For One, Immature, Radish, and Hanson, who were a huge get at the time just coming off the success of MMMBop. Ah crap, now that song's stuck on my head. Quick, I better show something to get this out of my brain. The show finally premiered on September 13th, 1997 as part of CBS's new Think Kids block, which consisted of The Weird Al Show, Beakman's World, Fudge, the new Ghost Rider Mysteries, Wheel 2000, the SI for Kids Show, and The Morning News, which ran for 2 hours in the middle of the block because at this point I think CBS was trying to tank this whole thing. The show was poorly promoted from the start, and Al would often joke that the only ads for The Weird Al Show were during The Weird Al Show. Even the Hanson episode, which given their popularity was considered a pretty big get, was hardly promoted anywhere. And making matters worse, there was no consistency to the scheduling of the show, as CBS affiliates all across the country would air the show at different times, meaning it was really hard for Al to promote when the show would be on, other than telling people to check their local listings. So, after all that lengthy context about the insane production of the show, the time has come for me to finally give my review of it, and I gotta say, if I had seen this in 1997, it would have been my favorite show. Look, it isn't a lost classic, but I really like it, and once I found out how badly tampered with it was in production, I borderline love it. Yes, the show is incredibly messy, and the lessons it tries to teach are often, at best, barely coherent, but I love the manic energy. It's a 22-minute show that slows down when they try to advance the plot, but flies by when they deliver the comedy. The 13 episodes all follow the same basic structure. Al has a problem, Al acts like a jerk, usually to someone else, Al figures out he's being a jerk, Al apologizes for being a jerk, Al goes back to being a jerk next week because CBS is really bad at this. Although some of the plots do have standout moments, I'm Looking at You episode that entirely revolves around raising the money to meet John Tesh, those were the weakest parts of the show. To me, the best parts of the show are the sketches and gags that don't have anything really to do with teaching a lesson and more to do with, being funny. Whether it's Al introducing us to his imaginary friend Gilbert Gottfried or showing us his home movies, the best stuff was just delightfully stupid. But the absolute highlight of the show was whenever Al took a seat in his eyeball chair for some Al TV. Those segments are the best parts of the show, and I don't think it's particularly close, as its rapid-fire changing channel style series of sketches really hit the spot for someone like me who has the attention span of a... What was I talking about? Ah, crap, people are watching this. Better play a clip while I remember. Al TV has so many great bits, including a dead-on parody of Bill Nye the Science Guy that apparently made the Science Guy a little upset, Beekman forever. But to me, the best part of the show is Fred Huggins. A mix of Mr. Rogers, Captain Kangaroo, and Doug Hennig, Fred Huggins was a fellow kid show host whose soft pleas for love and togetherness contrasted with his puppets Baby and Papa Bully, who, well, f***ing hated his guts. Like a lot of my favorite Weird Al stuff, it's silly, but with some darkness behind it. Fred Huggins was also the center of my favorite story of the show's clashes with the network. When dealing with CBS, Al and the writers would often use a trick a lot of writers use, where they would write wild stuff they knew would be denied so they could get the borderline stuff approved. With that in mind, they wrote a sketch where Baby and Papa Bully hang themselves to get away from Fred, only to be shocked when somehow CBS approved the sketch for a while before eventually someone figured it out. As for the reviews at the time, they were decidedly mixed, especially amongst the 5th graders at Lincoln Elementary in Madison, Wisconsin, who articulated their feelings about the show better than any of the adult reviewers I read. While I don't have exact numbers, according to Al, the show is far and away the highest rated show on the Think Kids block, and although the first season was such a meat grinder, Al thought he had kinda got a handle of it by the end, and was excited for season 2. Unfortunately, that would not come to pass, as CBS not only cancelled the Weird Al show, but all of the Think Kids lineup, instead giving the reins of Saturday morning to a Canadian animation company, Nelvana. And there's a Smells Like Nelvana joke in there somewhere, but I just can't find it. Al and Dick Clark shopped the show around to other networks, but the writing was on the wall, and after 13 episodes, the Weird Al show was no more. Poutine! Smells Like Nelvana! Poutine! Canada! Where was I? While the failure of the show certainly bothered Al, like always, he was constantly moving forward, in more ways than one. The Weird Al show would be one of the last times Al would be seen with his trademark glasses and mustache, as shortly after the cancellation, he pivoted to the look he has had now for almost 3 decades. When you rewatch the episodes and see how out of control Al's hair was getting, it's hard not to wonder if you're watching him make the decision in real time. Al has continued to make music and is somehow probably bigger now than he's ever been. He's the elder statesman of novelty music with an approval rating that's unparalleled. As Al's acceptance into the mainstream steadily increased, so did curiosity about the Weird Al show. He has a legendarily dedicated fan base, so tapes of the show began circulating as more and more people became interested in this bizarre television experiment. Numerous websites popped up dedicated to the show, and especially getting it on DVD, which finally came to pass in 2006. The DVD set includes all 13 episodes and commentary tracks featuring Al, Peyton Reed, and producer Tom Frank that basically spends the entire time making fun of how awful it was to work with CBS. It's the maddest I've ever heard Weird Al, and even that still isn't that mad. I mean, Weird Al's 10 on a rageometer is like a New England 2. The show is streaming out there, but I'm not going to tell you where because that would date my video to this time period. It's hard not to watch the show and just feel really appreciative that Weird Al exists. Listen, he's one of the most beloved figures in music at this point, so it's not like I'm breaking new ground here. But when you stop and think about it, it's amazing what he's achieved. Sure, the show didn't go his way, but instead of resting on his laurels singing songs about food, he stepped outside his comfort zone in a medium he wasn't familiar with, all because he had a singular vision. And in a time where everyone is less concerned with success and more concerned with not failing, I find myself far more interested in the swings than the misses. Truly, Weird Al Yankovic is a national treasure. Either that or everything I know is wrong. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the like button. If you want to see more, hit subscribe. And let me know in the comments below what you think of Weird Al and his show. Oh, and if you're so inclined to, I do have YouTube memberships open as well as Patreon if you feel like financially supporting these weird deep dives. Links are in the video description, and thank you to those who have already signed up.